Alright, these notes are going to be on cell membrane. The cell transport portion of the notes will be a second video. So the cell membrane. By now, hopefully you've seen it listed also as the plasma membrane. In terms of this class and how I use it, I'm always going to call it the cell membrane. But remember, it is selectively permeable, meaning this is selective or choosy. And then permeable is the ability for things to move in and out. So what that means is the cell is very selective in what moves in and out. So this picture right here is supposed to kind of show that. The blue dashes are supposed to be the cell membrane. The dark red dots are the ones that are able to move through, or things that are good for the cell. And the larger pink dots are things that are bad for the cell or shouldn't be allowed to enter. So in a nutshell here, the cell membrane allows things like nutrients, which is what this picture is supposed to demonstrate. So it allows nutrients in and waste out. So the waste is going to be everything that moves out of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is the function, or I should say the structure of it, is a phospholipid bilayer. Hopefully you recognize the term lipid. You know that means a fat. And bi, the prefix, means two. So it's a double layer fat that protects the cell. So this is what makes the cell membrane. It has two parts to it. So it has the glycerol phosphate head, which are all these dots you see. This is the head. It's all this whole thing, and the bottom is also the head. Then you have two fatty acid chain tails. So the tails are going to be in the middle here. So they're what face each other. And because they are the term hydrophobic, that means they fear. So if someone has a phobia, they are afraid of something. So these fatty acid chains are afraid of water. So that's why they touch each other versus pointing out toward the water would be. Now the head part is hydrophilic, which means love or loving. So I should say fearing, loving. So the head parts love the water, so that's why they face out. So the cell membrane is also called a fluid mosaic model. So this means that many molecules float in the membrane. So you see we have this guy, this is kind of on the outside, this is floating, this is floating. There's lots and lots of parts that make up the cell membrane. So these molecules above here are things like proteins, and there's 5 types total. Cholesterol and carbohydrates, which are 2 different types. Hopefully you remember proteins and carbohydrates from our macromolecules. So there's 5 specific proteins. There's 3 here and 2 on the next slide. So the first one is going to be your glycoproteins. So glycoproteins have a carbohydrate attached, or a carbohydrate chain attached to the protein. So this whole thing is a glycoprotein. Your integral proteins are proteins found within the cell membrane. So this guy is an integral protein because it's within the entire cell membrane. It goes from this side all the way to this side. Now what's attached to the integral protein is the peripheral protein. Peripheral means edges, outside. So your peripheral vision is out of the corner of your eye, how well you can see. So peripheral proteins are going to be on the edges. So this one's a peripheral, this one is, and we'll see another picture later with some other ones of it. Also, if you look down here at this drawing, the pinkish ones are your peripherals, and integrals are your ones all the way through here. So the other 2 types are going to be channel proteins and carrier proteins. So channel looks just like it sounds. So you see it has this channel here that things can move through, like how a boat would move through a channel. But it's only allowing specific things through. The carrier protein, on the other hand, which is this guy, does still let specific things through. It's not going to let bad things into the cell, but it's not as choosy because it can take larger things because it opens. So it's going to open this way. It'll pass through whatever it's taking in, and then it opens that way. These guys kind of remind me of Pac-Man. That's a really bad one, but they look like little Pac-Mans the way they eat, and they rotate, and then they dump out inside of the cell. So protein functions in the bilayer. Proteins are probably the most important thing to the cell membrane because they have 3 major functions. So they transmit signals, which is going to be like this one here. And if you look, this just reminds me of a little radio antenna sticking out of it for getting signals. They also support the structure. So an integral protein is going to go from top to bottom. It's going to keep that structure of the membrane. And then your channel proteins, which is this guy, or your carrier ones, which are the ones that look like Pac-Man, those ones are going to be responsible for transportation, so moving things in and out of the cell. So there's 3 different functions depending on the types of proteins. The next major thing in the cell membrane is cholesterol. So I'm sure you've heard of the term cholesterol from food or checking your cholesterol levels, but cholesterol in the cell is good for it because it prevents all these fatty acid tails from sticking together. So these little yellow chains here make sure that all these other tails aren't going to stick together. Basic, simple function. So carbohydrates, there's 2 types, like we said. So you have ones that are attached to a protein and ones that are attached to a lipid. So a glycoprotein is going to be a protein plus carb. And then a glycolipid is a lipid plus a carb. Now the carbohydrate itself is just this blue chain here. These are the actual carbohydrates. And like we had kind of mentioned, the function of a carbohydrate is to identify the chemical signals. So like I had said, antenna on a radio. So all these little green chains sticking up are for signals for the cell. And they're going to be attached to, like I said, either attached to a protein or the head portion of the cell membrane, which is a lipid. So let's practice labeling. You will have a quiz on cell membrane, and you will have to label it and give functions. So this, I'm just going to abbreviate here, is a peripheral protein because it's on the edge. This guy here is going to be our integral protein. Let's see. This will be a glycolipid. This one is a glycoprotein. And the little green thing in general is a carbohydrate. The yellow things here, there's a bunch of them, are your cholesterol. And then in general, all these little dots all over the place are the head, or the heads, which are hydrophilic, which means they like water, or love it. And then all these little tails in here, let's label over here, are the tails. And they are hydrophobic. Means they fear water. And then here's another one. This is one that you will have on your worksheet that you're going to do in class on Friday. So once again, over here you have your carbs, which are attached. This is a glycolipid. Over here you have your glycoprotein. Oops. This in general is the head. This is the tail. Oops, over here. Let's see, head, tail. This is your cholesterol. This one here is an integral protein. this one is a peripheral. And then A just means the phospholipid bilayer. And that's it.